Today on the Mr. Maple Show, Matt, Tim, and Sean interview Don Brooks of Kubota Garden.
Hey guys, welcome to the Mr. Maple Show. I'm Matt. I think we got a great interview for you today. We're actually live at the Maple Society, so we've got a live studio audience here today, and I think we've got an awesome interview lined up for you.
Hey guys, I'm Tim. Get excited. We've got a great one for you today with Don Brooks. He's been the curator of Kubota Gardens, and that's my favorite gardens in the United States, hands down.
Hey everybody, I'm Sean, and this one I think is a really, really special one because this one has a very historical aspect to this podcast.
So without further ado, we're here with Don Brooks of Kubota Garden, or is it Gardens? I know Tim said Gardens.
Garden.
Uh-oh. All right, Don, well, tell us a little bit. We'll break into it. We'll get into more of your background and everything. But if you will, kind of let our listeners know a little bit about Kubota Garden, kind of right out the gate, so they can kind of understand a little bit about it.
Well, basically, Fujitaro Kubota came to the United States in 1906, worked a bunch of different places, arrived in Hawaii, went to California, eventually came up to Washington State, worked in some hotels, things like that, and did a little bit of helping friends with gardening, because there were a lot of Japanese people gardening in the Northwest, but they mostly mowed lawns and things like that. Fujitaro grew up in Japan with no formal garden training, but in an agricultural area. So he had a sensibility of nature. And his father was kind of the head of the village, and that was Fujitaro's role to inherit. And that wasn't of interest to him, so he left the country and came to the United States and did a variety of things, and then decided to buy property. And so he bought 5 acres in the south part of Seattle and eventually ended up with 20 acres, built his own garden, built a company building gardens for people, and just had his own style of doing things. Mm-hmm. He was eventually awarded the 5th degree from the Emperor of Japan for his introduction of this style of gardening to the Northwest. And he very much combined Eastern and Western gardens. He didn't build traditional Japanese gardens. He was a very flamboyant individual who liked to do things his way. And so he built the Kubota Garden. And eventually it just became 20 acres in the middle of the city, or not on the edge of the city, was too much to take care of from a tax standpoint, from all of these things. So he eventually, long story around, he passed it on to the city of Seattle, where the garden was preserved, which was his and the family's long-term dream.
I think it's just such a beautiful story. I know the group here, we're here with the North American Maple Society. We'll be touring the garden on,
Good job.
We'll be touring the garden on Sunday, and I've been there before. I know you've heard me say it in some interviews before, but it's one of my favorite garden in the entire world, and it's just cool. I love that it combines so many aspects of traditional Japanese gardening, but also that sense of flair that he had, that flashiness that you spoke to. And it speaks to me because I love, obviously, Japanese maples. That's what we do here. And I think that excitement and that color contrast that's built there, but also some of those traditional elements really makes this place special.
I agree.
So let's get into a little bit about how you first came to Kubota Garden.
Well, here's the long story. So my mother is Swedish, and so I grew up with kind of the reserved Swedish nature. Mm-hmm. And so I knew that this garden was being discussed as something, and I was working for the Parks Department, and I knew that the the city was interested in acquiring it, so I never went because I was a shy Swede. And eventually I got drugged there before the city had acquired it, and I said, whoa, I love this place. And it was pretty rough at that time. The Kubota family didn't have time to maintain it. Tom Kubota, the Fujitaro's son, worked full-time building gardens for other people, and then after work he would come by himself and try and take care of 15 to 20 acres of garden. That's not an easy thing to do. And so it became obvious that something was going to happen to it. And condominium people wanted to buy it, and it came very close to going to condominiums. And the public stopped it, and the Parks Department eventually purchased it. And so I had looked at it, and the opening came up to be the head gardener there. And I went into the interview with a big manual of a 5-year plan. This is what I'm going to do, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And everybody else went in with the idea of, I'm a hard worker. But I went in with a plan because I knew what I wanted to do. And so they gave me the job.
I think the rest is history, and everybody in this region owes you a debt of gratitude too for keeping this place and kind of keeping that history alive of this place. I think it's such a special story. I've heard you talk about it in presentations, the Maple Society before. Not only does it combine, parts of his ancestry from Japan, but also this aspect of forgiveness you were telling me about before, where I believe he ran into some trouble even after World War II, especially here locally, and it kind of was just a symbolic gesture of people coming together again in some ways.
Well, of course, the family was taken to what was essentially a concentration camp. Mm-hmm. Japanese Americans were taken. His family was in Minidoka in Idaho, and Tom and his brother Tack were, of course, in the military. Were in the armed services. Mm-hmm. There's a good one for you. And after the war, Tom went back to Seattle, and his parents were still in the camps. They hadn't emptied them out at that point. And Tom went around and talked to their former clients, and they all said, please come back. We want you to come back. Mm-hmm. And so they did. And it was evidently a very emotional moment for Fujitaro to come back because no one had really taken care of the gardens for the 4 years or so that they were gone. And everything was massively overgrown. And they had been doing garden maintenance in addition to installing gardens. And at that point, they said, we're done with maintenance. We're just going to build gardens for people, which they did for many years. And really they had the best way to do it because they never wrote anything down. They didn't you'd give them some money and they would build you a garden. Mm-hmm. And that was it. And they would dig plants on their grounds. And if you weren't happy, tough. they would walk away. I mean, there were stories where those of you who've been to the Bloedel Reserve, there's a Japanese portion of this garden. Of course, the Bloedels were huge money from timber, and Mr. Bloedel thought that he should have a Japanese garden. And Fujitaro went over and looked at it and said, well, there's this big pond, and I think we should raise the level of the pond where the Japanese garden will be, and the lower level, it's east meets west, and this kind of thing. And Mr. Bloedel says, no, I don't think so. So they loaded up their gear and they left. Said, well, we're done. And Bloedel was away, and they loaded it all up and just went back and built it without permission. Oh, wow. And Bloedel came back and said, yeah, you were right.
Oh, wow.
That's awesome.
So that's the way he worked.
So on a lighter note and a more personal note, I think you almost like the quintessential Pacific Northwest guy. I think of somebody from Pacific Northwest, you kind of embody that. Are you from this region originally?
I grew up in the northeast portion of Washington State, up in timber country. My dad worked for a sawmill, eventually became the manager of it. So we spent a lot of time driving around the mountains looking at prospective areas to log. Yeah. And, I was outside my whole life. And then I in high school, I took one of these tests, what are you going to be kind of thing. And
I was always scared of those.
Yeah, what it came out to be was either you can be a farmer or something outside. And turns out gardener's kind of like being a farmer.
Right.
And the being outside part. So for about 10 years, I did nothing but climb mountains and ski. And then eventually, my wife said, you've got to make a decision here. You were just gone. You were just gone 9 months, and you've either got to, stay around, or not be gone so much. So I decided to stay around.
That's good advice.
Yeah, it worked. It worked out well for me.
Well,
yeah, so I stayed around.
I think you were the perfect person to take this job, and you continued on that legacy of having that flair with traditional Japanese gardening, and that's really what makes Kubota Garden so special.
To ask you a question about that, how many? What would you say are the main components of the plants that make up this garden? Like, what are the main aspects of this when people visit?
Well, the first thing when we were discussing with the parks people, it was called kind of a Japanese garden with Northwest influence, whatever that meant. And you still read stuff today that says, well, they're growing native plants in a Japanese style, but that's really not true. There's not very many native plants there. So I kind of went around. One of my first instructions was to only cut down dead stuff. And I had a manager who was frankly pretty clueless. And I looked around and I said, well, there's tons of live stuff that needs to be cut, seedling fir trees and stuff that were growing all over the place. So I went and cut those down, which I wasn't supposed to do. And the manager would come and she'd still, I'd cut down a couple dead ones and a bunch of live ones. Come back and she wouldn't even notice that I'd removed all sorts of stuff. And then we went through several cycles of that, and then she moved on to another position. And then I spent a lot of time with Tom Kubota, who was the son of Fujitaro. And we have a magnificent picture of Tom and Fujitaro standing at the Kubota garden in a space that is now basically occupied by a plant called, let's see, what is that called? Baby Ghost.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, which Mr. Buchholz knows. I believe it was Baby Ghost #1.
Oh, very
and
cool.
so there's a picture of Tom at age 10 standing in this with his father with this devastated area behind him, completely clear cut. And Tom, to help buy the property, he gave his dad his paper route money to help buy the property. So, it's been in his family for a long time. Tom passed away many years ago, but he spent 75 years working in the garden. And he was my teacher. And we would walk around and just sit here and there and talk about this and that. And in a classic, I think, Japanese way of teaching, he would never tell me what to do. He would kind of speak around the point a little bit. And we would talk about an area over here, and I was kind of expected to understand he was actually talking about that area over there. And it worked out pretty well. The family was very definitely nervous for a year or two about this guy coming in and taking over their family place. But eventually Tom and I really grew to, to love each other.
So did you have a passion for this prior to this, or did you just grow into it?
No, I definitely had a passion for it. This was what really interested me. When my wife told me that I had to make a choice, I decided, well, I better go to horticulture school. And like I say, I had been a rock climber for many years, and I started to look at Japanese gardens, and they had a lot of stone in them. And this spoke to me. And then I took a class in Japanese gardens, and a guy took a rhododendron cynthia, which is this big grotesque pink flower thing on a hybrid rhodie, and he picked off 3/4 of the blossoms and said, now, doesn't this look better? And it looked so much simpler. It made a huge amount of sense to me. And so, it kind of fit together. And so that's where I really got into it. And I decided, yes, this makes sense to me.
Well, we're live at the Maple Society meeting, And so I've got to get into some maple questions.
Okay.
So what about maples, and specifically Japanese maples, helped you accomplish your mission at Kubota Garden?
Hard to say. The Kubotas would dig out the best trees in the garden to sell, to put into their gardens. And so it's 20 acres, about 15 of which we gardened. And so when I went there, there were only, we have a volunteer, Susie Cook, who has really done a thorough job of documenting. And we figure out that there are 27 maples in the garden that were there when when the city took it over. And there's about 300 now, because I like Japanese maples.
That was going to be one of the next questions.
Yeah. And I actually went to a talk at the University of Washington, or Center for Urban Horticulture, that Vertrees gave. And I had a signed first edition from him, which unfortunately I loaned to someone, and it's gone.
Oh no!
Yeah, that's too bad. And so this tree just stuck. Really meant something to me, and I loved visiting the Japanese garden in the Arboretum, and the maples hit home.
So we've talked a lot about the gardens. We've talked a little bit about your background. If completely not horticulture, what would you be doing? What would you have done with the last 30 years you spent at Kubota instead? What would be your passion?
Well, I needed to be outside. So I was a guide, taking people on climbing trips and skiing and that kind of stuff. And that was a good time, but I got tired of babysitting. and I don't know what else I'd be doing. I mean, this was the classic deal. If you're doing what you love, it's easy to go to work. And I loved every day. Even when the nastiest of weather, because you've all heard the story, there's no bad weather, there's just bad rain gear. And I had good rain gear, so it never bothered me. Weather, and I spent a lot of nights in the mountains with minimal gear, trying to sleep in raging snowstorms. And so the kind of weather that we get in the garden is nothing.
I can imagine. I follow you on social media. I know you're so well traveled. I know you're recently in Mongolia.
Yeah, in Mongolia. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about some of your travels. What are some of your favorite places you visited for horticulture and just for the experiences?
Well, I mostly traveled in North America. I mean, I did some climbing in the Alps and in the Himalayas and stuff, but mostly North America. I was what's referred to kindly as a dirtbag.
Uh-oh.
That meant I lived in the back of my Falcon and just drove year-round climbing, working odd jobs, and just hanging out in the mountains. And that was completely satisfying to me.
So let's bring it back to maples for a second.
Okay.
So you said there's
Tim will always bring it back to maples.
Oh yeah. So you said there's 300 different maples at Kubota Garden.
Yep.
Out of those, is there some specific maples, if someone went to Kubota Garden, that they would just have to go check out? The top highlights.
To me, the maples are a part of the garden, but there's tremendous number of conifers, there's broadleafs, there's everything. And a lot of Japanese gardens, a plant will be by itself, and I'm a cramscaper, so I grew up in the mountains where everything grows together, and that's the look that I like. So a lot of plants are misformed because they've been jammed into corners, and I have really bad vision. When I take my glasses off, I can barely recognize you guys. And so I've got this Monet kind of thing, the paintings of Monet, he couldn't see. And so you look at his paintings, and they kind of reflect that. And that's what I see when I look at the garden view. I see colors, I see shapes, I see these kinds of things, and the specific cultivar is in a way not that important to me. And Mr. Kubota was not interested in the names either. He didn't care about that stuff. And Haruko can help me with this, because people would ask me, what's the name of that plant? And he'd go real fast. He'd go, I don't know. And he'd say this in Japanese, and they go, ooh. Ooh, we've got an, I don't know. And they were thrilled. And I kind of feel the same way. I mean, I love each individual tree and I enjoy looking at each tree, but I really like the overall picture that it paints as much as anything.
I think for many of collectors listening, and for many of us in the Maple Society, Kubota's special because it kind of has the dream of what we want to create. Like, it has aspects of traditional Japanese gardening, but it obviously has that flair and flashiness that draws us to this style gardening. Is there any advice that you would give our listeners? They're not going to create something maybe on the scale of Kubota, but what should they think about when trying to encompass these cultivars and that flash into their own garden?
Well, a lot of people plant their lawns on flat ground. I like to see elevation.
Mm-hmm.
I like to see movement, and so I'm delighted when things touch, and of all different kinds of things. Like I say, I look at it as a painting, and if you're a perennial gardener, you do the same kind of thing. Maples are big perennials to me in that sense, and I wow myself by looking at the individual plants. So I like to go in and out in view. Look at the big picture, but then go up and look at the small picture. And that's one of the things that the Kubotas did, because they would build gardens for people. And it's incredibly intimidating to walk into a place this big and think, oh, these people could build me a garden. But if you say, I could build you this little tiny section right here in your garden, the way these 3 plants and these 2 stones work together, I can do that for you. And I look at, when I go look into the garden, I try to look at it from that perspective as well.
I think that's really helpful, and that's something people can kind of incorporate into their own aspects there. And I think it really is the dream to create something like Kubota, especially for Japanese maple collectors. You look at that garden and it just has everything you want going on. It's got all those traditional aspects, but it's got everything we love about something as flashy as Baby Ghost you mentioned. It's got that pizzazz going on as well. And that's why it's one of my favorite places. I'm really excited to be going there on this Sunday. I think it'll be a real treasure for everybody that hadn't been before. If not, we mentioned if not maples or if not horticulture, what else would you be doing? Take us into a little bit of your climbing world. I know you're quite accomplished in climbing. What does that look like?
Well, I was never, in spite of the fact that I would climb 200, 250 days a year, I wasn't that serious about it.
That sounds pretty serious to me.
Yeah. It was more just a lifestyle. I wasn't going after records or accomplishments or anything like that. There's still people that I know that I've climbed with for 50 years. Mm. And we get together all the time, and we're just brothers and sisters, and I love being with these people. And I get that same sense with the plant groups that I'm with. It's a delightful group of people that participate in these things, and it's not that different.
I can't imagine what you're climbing, but yeah, I can see the similarities there. I can't imagine saying you climb that much and it's not that serious either. Like, holy cow!
Well, it's funny. I lost a lot of friends climbing. A lot of people that I knew died climbing, and at one point there was a group of 6 or 8 of us that were a pretty hardcore group, and you would kind of look around and go, there's a pretty good chance that one of us won't be here next year. Wow. So that's serious. But I would always pull back from the edge. I was not interested in going over the edge, which a lot of people were, or going right to the edge. I was willing to pull back.
So bring it back to maples again.
Whoa!
I really liked your answer about Kubota Garden and how you could actually, you place them in a bigger picture, which was amazing. But I know that you're a part of the Maple Society.
I am.
And I know you love maples.
I do.
So give me some of your favorite maples.
Some of my favorite maples. I've one of the things that I've tried to do at Kubota is have ones that people could buy. They're old standards, they're classics, and they're classics for a reason. And they can be as new as the Ghost series. I have a bunch of different ghosts, and just Osakazuki, just these big old beefy red ones are really, really great plants. So, those are all good. I'm not good at specific. It's going to be hard to tie me down to one or many, because there's so many and they're all beautiful as long as they're good growers. I'm interested in good growers, and I'm interested in putting them in the ground and being able to not fuss too much about them, because we have very minimal staffing. Unfortunately, the city doesn't give us half the staff that we need to do the job we would like to do. So everything is rough. We'll see. We're going to visit the Highline Botanic Garden, and there's a Japanese garden there, which I was very fortunate to be involved in transplanting this garden that was going to be run over by the airport expansion. The pines there are beautifully maintained. We're not able to do that at Kubota because we just don't have the time. We never had the time. And it's the same thing with the maples. There's a lot of pruning that needs to be done on everything in there. We don't have the time. There was a period where I was alone for a while, with like 15 acres of big plants. And then at the best, oftentimes there were only two of us. And so it's a tough road. We need many more people, but we do the best we can. And I think most people walk in and the wow factor is still there, even though the maintenance is not what I wish it was.
I think it speaks for itself. It definitely has the wow factor.
So I'm interested in knowing that you talked about the kind of design of the garden and how you came up with that. What is your opinion on modern garden design coming from your perspective of how it was done when you were doing it?
Well, this garden, the Kubotas did work in a much more traditional style of gardening, the Japanese garden, with basically a lot of empty space and individual plants. And like I say, I grew up in the mountains and I like stuff together. For one thing, there's not as much maintenance. And that was my perspective on it. So it's a Northwest garden. It fits the style of what we do here, because Seattle, frankly, is a really easy place to grow plants. Yeah. You stick them in the ground and they grow. We don't have to fuss too much. And so I like things crowded up, and people from Japan who visit can see Japanese elements in the garden. But most people who walk through, they don't know. They don't really, it doesn't mean that much to them. It feels good. And we're in an area, a very diverse area of Seattle that, and then maybe in the 2010 census, it was considered like the most diverse zip code in the United States, divided between a whole bunch of different groups of people. And it's still, our garden, the garden is free, and so it's really open to people. And it's very common to see people from Ethiopia or Russia or any place coming in and having events, weddings, big cultural celebrations in the garden. And I love that aspect of it. It's a very free and open, democratic kind of place to go. It's not restricted to just people who are specifically looking for Japanese gardens or whatever. They're looking for a beautiful place to come and relax and enjoy.
Well, I would ask you what aspect of this you think is the lasting legacy, but I think you covered a lot of that right there. So I'll ask you kind of a little bit of that, but what's next for the garden?
Well, this is another tough one, and I'm probably treading on some toes here, but I believe that gardens like this are created by individuals. Mm-hmm. And Fujitaro was very much an individual. And when he passed away in the early 70s, His son took it over, followed his father's way, and then I took it over for a goodly length of time. And when I started, I got no interference from anyone in the Parks Department because it was like out there, and it became, well, it's like, he's doing okay, so let's just leave him alone. And so they left me alone, and I just went for it. And I got caught a couple of times doing things I wasn't supposed to do. Other times, various unions would go, our union's supposed to do that, but you're doing fine. Just go ahead and do it. And I wasn't supposed to operate heavy equipment, and then they gave me a backhoe. Well, yeah, I'm going to go dig some holes, and I'm going to put some rocks in. Dang right. And so I just kept going. There was one time when I had to go to a board of all these directors and stuff and justify something that I was doing. And the directors were kind of arguing. And finally, one of the directors says, I don't know why we're even here. He's just going to do whatever he wants anyway.
Best case scenario.
And I said, yeah, you're probably right. And so they let me get away with a lot.
So
Unfortunately, now it's changed. Now consultants have stepped in, and it's no longer an individual vision. Now it's consultants who, frankly, don't know what they're talking about. I'm sorry to those consultants, but they don't get it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So you've had this garden that you've been in charge of for a number of years, and you've done so many neat projects within the garden. Is there one specific project that you just had the best time doing that stood out from the rest?
Well, there was one project that I wanted to do, and they wouldn't let me, so that's when I retired.
Oh.
So, well, I'm not going to just mark time. I guess I'm done. I kind of have my fingers on everything. But there's a section, it's called the Stone Garden, Maple Woods, that we'll walk through. And I did the whole thing there. And, I'm pleased and proud of that. But everywhere I went, I brought in hundreds of plants. And the members of the Maple Society, growers and all, have been very generous in providing me with, 4-inch caliper maples to instant access. I mean, the big thing, not just putting in gallons, but putting in big trees. And we did a lot of going out and in neighborhoods and digging plants up with people who wanted to move stuff out. So we moved a lot of big trees and brought them in, and I'm just really proud of all of that.
I think everybody that's ever been to this garden knows you a debt of gratitude, the original founders, the family, everything. But just you keeping this legacy going and making this place special and what it is today. I've told you before, but it's one of my favorite places to visit, and it's truly special. Even if you're looking at the big picture, if you're somebody who likes individual trees, I think there's something there for everybody. And there's just something interesting about the whole place, and it definitely still has that sense of awe, that wow factor you're talking about. Because when you walk in, you don't have to know anything about plants. My wife didn't know anything about plants when I met her, but if I took her there, she would be like, "Wow, this is special. It's got that it factor to it."
And we've had some great projects over the years. I mean, we had one really fun one. I thought that we should do something in this one area, and I was visiting a stone yard here, Marinacos, which is a very amazing place for buying stone. They collected them in the mountains, and actually Fujitaro Kubota got them started by visiting their peat nursery in the Kent Valley here. And they had some rocks that they'd come across, and they threw them aside. And Fujitaro was collecting some peat for a job, and he said, "Well, how much do you want for the rocks?" And they were going, "What? Buy rocks? Are you kidding?" And so these people in Marinacos said, "Hey, maybe we could start selling rocks." And so they went up in the Cascades and started bringing them down. But we built this one project that I had wanted to do, and a few other people thought it was a good idea. So I went into Marinacos many years ago, and a couple of guys that I knew were in there, and they were talking and saying, we were just talking about wanting to do a public project with stone. And I said, I know of a project that they did in California. These Japanese guys came over and built this project. I'd like to get those guys. And one of the guys that was there at Marinacos said, I was the translator for those guys. He was a Japanese guy who his parents were anthropologists in Mexico or in Central America. So he spoke fluent Spanish, Japanese, and English. And so he says, I'll see if those guys want to do it. So they came over, 13th and 14th generation stonemasons, and we did a symposium where people paid money to come and help work with these guys.
Oh, cool.
And we built this beautiful stone structure in 9 working days. And it was amazing. I mean, these guys, we had 300 tons of stone with a crane sitting in the center. And the master would walk around and point at 4 stones, and we'd pick them up and move them into the fabrication area. He'd walk around, draw lines, and we'd hand split them, and then we'd pick them up and put them in the wall, and they were perfect. And when we were done, we went in with a laser and measured the 4 corners. It protrudes out like the walls that you see at the base of Japanese castles. So there are 2 walls, 2 corners out here, and 2 corners back up against level ground behind. And we measured the 4 corners. These guys had a string line, and that was it. 4 corners came out about quarter inch.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
No measurement, nothing like done with the eye.
Wow.
Yeah, these guys were really good at what they did.
If you were talking people into paying to come do stonework, I've done a little of that. That they should have you signing up to do everything ever after that. If that is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, we had 4 guys from Japan paid to come because there's no way
So
that they
cool.
would get to work in Japan
And what an
with
experience.
masters of these level. So they paid to come and join as well. So it was awesome.
I know Matt and I were on a TV show called Nippon Ikitai, and we were taken to Japan, and we built a Japanese gardening with Nakata-san in his nursery. We had to dig the plants. We had to do all the work, and they stood back and advised us. And I'm like, I was sweating like a pig.
We made a 20 by 20 and we were about to die. So I can't imagine what goes on with all this, the hardscape, just the labor that goes into, the labor of love that really goes into this place. It's special.
Yep.
So what are you doing now to keep yourself busy in retirement?
Well, I've been retired for 5.5 years, and I'm still building gardens. I'm building my own garden. I've got a lot of plants in my garden. It's called cramscaping. I'm a collector, a cramscape collector. I've got 50 or 60 tons of stone that I'm building walls, and I've got tons of plants, and I work for tons of other friends, and I still do the same thing. I do it all day. I love it. And I ski a lot too.
If people want to visit Kubota that are listening to this, is there a time of the year you'd recommend?
Anytime.
Yeah.
Anytime. You should come anytime. It's good all year round. And people don't come in the wintertime, and the wintertime is wonderful.
Yeah.
Because there's so many evergreen, so many conifers. It's beautiful all the time, all year, all the time.
Well, I love going to the gardens and checking out maples, the structures during the winter. I think that's one of the most important times to go visit a tree.
It is. And the lace leaf maples at Kubota are not what I wish they could be. They're the big cousin-its, the big mounds. And one problem that we have had is if we detail them out too much, the kids want to get in there and climb on them. No. And they're pretty hard on them. So we don't get to do that kind of pruning that I would really like to do. Although I'm going to do a little demonstration on Sunday where I'll do a little whack away at it. And we'll see a little bit of that. But it's tough. There's just not enough time to do everything we want to do.
Well, Don, I really appreciate you hopping on here today. You're an inspiration to a lot of people, especially with your passion for this place and just, the lifetime of effort you've put into preserving this place. I want to say thank you. It's something special. It resonated with me the first time I came. I thought, what a crazy place that, that shock and wow factor. And hopefully it's something that's there for many generations to come to enjoy this place. kind of to enjoy its message, to enjoy what it is, and just this great public space you've helped create for free for people. I mean, my goodness, not only do you get to go to this place, it's completely free to get into this place. You could be charged admission. I'd be paying willingly to get in here. But I just want to say thanks for this. It's an amazing place.
I know the feeling I had the first time I went to Kubota Garden, and seeing things in fall colors, seeing the flair, but the traditional sense of gardening, it gave me a new appreciation for Japanese gardening. Before, I looked at Japanese gardening and I said, this is cool, but it's not for me. And then when I saw the extra flair that Kubota Garden has, it really spoke to me. And it gave me a new appreciation, not just for that, but also for Japanese gardening because of the extra flair.
I think the relatability there is something that's attainable for, not really attainable on this scale, I mean, but it's something that a collector of maples can dream to achieve to.
Absolutely. You can, like I say, you can take a little view and apply that to your garden. And I want to thank you guys for all the work you guys have done. I mean, you really brought a lot of great maple info and availability and all to everyone in the country. So thanks to all of you guys.
Oh, you're welcome. And we're just honored to have you on here. Thanks so much for being part of the Mr. Maple Show episode today. Thanks to our studio audience here in the Maple Society. So if you haven't already, go check out the Maple Society, y'all. It's a great group of people. Get to meet guys like Don here. I mean, sign up for the Maple Say. It's a no-brainer. It's a great society. You're going to meet tons of fun people. Yearly conferences, switches East Coast, West Coast a lot, so you can kind of find a time even when it comes closer to you, but buy a plane ticket and get over wherever it's at.
What about the newsletter?
Yeah.
I mean, I love going checking out the newsletter, seeing all the cool, neat stuff that's in that. You're going to want to be a part of the Maple Society. Go to the Maple Society website, North American branch. You can actually register to become a member today. Amazing group of people. That's one of the things that helped grow mine and Matt's passion for Japanese maples. You need to be a part of it.
And the Kubota Garden has a website too, so you can check that out. Just Google Kubota Garden.
Yeah, get involved there. I don't know if there's something you'd like to plug there, a way people could ever get involved in that, but that's a special place. Anything you can do to help there is a great idea.
My plug is to come and visit.
All right, sounds great. Hey, thanks so much for being on. We appreciate you being part of it here today.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Take care.
God bless.
And have a great day.
Thank you all. You too.